the Max Bell Arena in Calgary.
What's good?
Every Wednesday afternoon, buses arrive carrying kids from all over the city. They are the children of recent immigrants and political refugees who have settled in the area.
Push your heel all the way down.
The kids are outfitted in donated skating and hockey gear.
Good. Yay!
The transportation is provided by the Calgary Police Foundation.
Okay.
They move on to the rink, where they are taught first to skate.
Okay, now you take the end of my hockey stick. Take little baby steps and push forward, okay? Atta girl. Good work.
And eventually to play hockey.
When I blow the whistle, you guys are going to try and skate to the other end.
By volunteer instructors from the Calgary Police Force. Everyone is having a good time.
I like it so much. I wish I could learn.
It might help if you had a hockey stick.
Calgary Police Sergeant Gareth Joels.
They get a chance to connect with one another and play our national sport. Families themselves get to connect. They're sitting on in the bleachers while these kids are out playing, and they're connecting. The kids also get to see the service as just people, and we're out there volunteer time, engaged with the kids, and we're hoping that that's going to alleviate any apprehension or fear they might have of police in general, and that one day down the road, if they need to call us for our help or whatever, then we're there for them. I'm hoping that one or two of these kids one day will maybe want to put on the police uniform and go serve the city.
In downtown Calgary, at the Maple Leaf Academy, the sign reads, "Many cultures, one Canada."
I am from Venezuela.
I'm from Kazakhstan.
I'm from Iran.
I have been here for almost 1 year.
I'm from Syria.
Syria, okay.
This is where immigrants come for training programs provided by the federal government, including English as a second language.
Well, let's talk about something that you all should be familiar with at some
Here,
point.
too, there is a special class to introduce newcomers to the Canadian legal system.
Our equality is all in here, is guaranteed by this document.
The instructor is Raul Espinoza, a Calgary police officer who immigrated to this country more than 20 years ago from Colombia.
I heard some Spanish being spoken, sorry.
We're covering off about their rights and freedoms now that they're Canadians.
It's what we call a crest.
We're also covering off and talking about what to expect from us as a service if they get pulled over at a traffic stop.
So ask them for an ID, yeah?
Many of the students come from authoritarian countries and so are suspicious of police.
Ask them for a badge or a badge number.
You can see at the beginning of this, it's a little awkward. And by mid-morning, now there's a bit of chuckling because they're working through scenarios together and overcoming some of these language barriers.
All right.
And before lunchtime, it's full-on photos and selfies, and it's really neat to see just on both sides. As police officers, we're nervous of them because we don't understand. But at the same time, it's a chance for these ESL students, these new immigrants, to see police officers in a different light.
Calgary has distinguished itself by becoming the first major city in the Western world to elect a Muslim mayor, Nenshi. It made headlines around the globe.
Today, Calgary is a different place than it was yesterday.
Nenshi's family immigrated to Canada in 1971 from Tanzania, at a time when many refugees were coming from East Africa. He was born in Toronto a month after they arrived, then moved to Calgary as a young boy. He graduated from the University of Calgary and then received a master's degree from Harvard. In 2010, he was elected mayor. He sees his family story as typically Canadian.
What's extraordinary about it for me is just how ordinary it is. It's a very Canadian story. A story of coming to try and create a future for yourself and for your family, and finding a community that is willing to invest in you, that is willing to support you, and willing to let that happen. Now, it wasn't all beautiful. There were moments of pretty severe poverty for my family and certainly for my community. There were certainly small and isolated incidents of xenophobia or racism that I dealt with growing up, but everyone who is a minority in a different community deals with that. You just learn how to deal with it.
Mayor Nenshi is a regular visitor to the Genesis Center, a huge facility where immigrant families often come for wedding ceremonies and community celebrations.
We're going to do 4 more.
They exercise in the gym, play soccer on an indoor field, do homework in the library, or maybe just have coffee with neighbors.
When someone who has just come from a refugee camp in Jordan walks into this beautiful space, they think, this is for me. I live in a place where the community has built this beautiful space that is open to me. Everyone belongs. Everyone deserves that place of dignity so that they too can live a life of dignity. And to me, that is a very important aspect of what we as a city government do, but what we as a community do. It was really, really important to tell a story of a place where this works, where multiculturalism works, where pluralism works. Now, I got to tell you, we got to fight every single day to make sure that we stay that way, because those elements of intolerance and small-mindedness and xenophobia are just below the surface. And we have to fight hard not to give them permission to come to the surface.
Calgary is not without incidents of intolerance. When it was announced that a large group of Syrian refugees was about to arrive in the city, anti-immigration vandals spray-painted racist graffiti on cars downtown and inside the train station.
A bunch of people saw it, reported it immediately, and a bunch of young men, young men in their 20s who you don't necessarily think of in this way, saw it and were so upset that they ran home, bought supplies, and came back to the train station in the middle of the night to clean up the graffiti. And what they found was that my colleagues at the City of Calgary were already cleaning it up. So instead, they used the supplies they had to make signs of love and welcoming. So the next morning on people's commute, you saw these 20-something guys holding big red paper hearts.
Quebec is the province of Canada that has struggled most with immigration issues. It has the worst immigration retention rate in the country.
C'est la part du kirpan en public qui me dérange un peu.
Le port de la burqa de la femme voilée au Québec.
C'est pas les Chinois qui sont venus coloniser le Québec, c'est pas les musulmans.
One factor has been the very loud public debates about immigration through the 2007 hearings of the Bouchard-Taylor Commission on Religious Accommodation.
Ah, Bernard.
And the Parti québécois Charter of Values proposal.
Alors je vous remets.
That PQ plan was soundly defeated in the last election campaign. But the new PQ leader Jean-François Lisée is bringing back identity politics, once again campaigning to ban Muslim clothing in public spaces, following the European examples. He even suggested that a Muslim woman could hide a machine gun under her burqa.
Well, yes, everyone's discussing this in Europe for a number of reasons. If you say this in Canada, they say, well, this guy is, xenophobic. Well, you have to know that it's okay to ask this question.
You refer to, maybe you were ahead of the time, but a woman could hide a machine gun under a burqa. Do you understand that many Muslims would take that almost as hysteria, racist hysteria?
I understand that, but I know, we know for a fact that the RCMP or the CSIS believe there are 25 suspects close to the Islamic State in Quebec as we speak. There's been one attempt in Saint-Jean. There's been one attempt in Ottawa. There were students from Maisonneuve that were caught with explosives in Montreal. These are facts, And so should we be prudent or not?
None of them was a Muslim woman hiding a machine gun under her clothing.
No, this happened elsewhere, okay? But a discussion about a full veil in the public sphere. And I've seen 10 European democracies have had this discussion and gave different responses to it.
Our bodies, our lives, our rights to decide.
Would Canada benefit from the same passionate debates about banning Muslim clothing that have occurred in Europe? McGill University law professor Daniel Weinstock thinks not.
I think that what's been happening throughout Europe and now in the United States, and there's signs that some of it might be making it here to Canada, is the sense that people have the permission to express things that they might have until now felt that they needed to repress. Various politicians, and Jean-François Lisée is not the only one, have not understood just how dangerous it can be in the present climate to try to make short-term political gain by even winking or nodding in the direction of these often very difficult to control sentiments that are out there.
Miss Kelly Leach.
On the national stage, the immigration debate is most striking in the Conservative Party leadership campaign.
We're talking about common sense ideas, whether that be screening immigrants for Canadian values with face-to-face interviews.
Candidate Kelly Leach has grabbed attention with her proposal to increase the screening of all future immigrants to make sure they share Canadian values.
Look, I think we would agree that violence, hate speech, those are things that are not Canadian values. And we're seeing overwhelmingly that the vast majority of Canadians agree that we should be screening for Canadian values and having face-to-face interviews with respect to those values. And just because the media and the elites don't want to have this discussion.
How do you identify Canadian values? I think that throughout the world, and in Europe in particular, talking about the values of the Netherlands or the values of Canada is code for talking about those groups that we have determined were somehow civilizationally not quite in tune with us. It's become a code word for talking about Islam. So I think that everybody who listens to Kelly Leach is not worried about Danish people coming to Canada and having to understand what Canadian values are. I think that people who listen to her know exactly what she's talking about, and it's a very dangerous road to go through.
You know, many have reacted to your proposal saying this is just code for keeping Muslims out.
Not at all. Not at all. I'm pro-Canadian. I'm not anti-anything, and I do find it interesting that others want to depict my message in a different way.
Kelly Leach first gained prominence during the last federal election campaign, when she unveiled the Harper Conservatives' proposal to establish a barbaric cultural practices hotline.
So that citizens and victims can call with information about incidents of barbaric cultural practices here in Canada.
It would have allowed Canadians to report their immigrant neighbors to police if any untoward behavior, such as forced marriages or genital mutilation, was suspected.
Conservative leadership candidate Kelly Leach said
She later apologized for the incident in a tearful interview on CBC's Power in Politics.
The message was lost, and I take responsibility for that.
Most other Conservative leadership candidates have criticized her new immigrant screening proposals. Aren't these immigration screening proposals in the same vein?
Not at all. I think that what we were talking about there were protecting girls here in Canada. What I'm talking about, as I say, is a shared value set.
Does it give you pause that most of the Conservative candidates and prominent Conservatives in Canada are pulling away from you over this issue?
Well, look, I understand people's hesitations. You know, when you have the media and others going after you relentlessly on these issues, I'd probably want to run away too. But I actually am a little tough. I'm a pediatric surgeon. I do have a backbone. And for me, 2/3 of Canadians are with me. 2/3 of Canadians on multiple polls agree that we should be screening immigrants for Canadian values, that we should be having face-to-face interviews for people coming into the country. And so I don't think that 2/3 of Canadians are racist.
The global anti-immigrant wave has boosted the fortunes of European radical right-wing parties, such as Marine Le Pen's National Front.
La politique des Français, pour les Français, avec les Français.
And Frauke Petrie's Alternative for Germany. And it strongly contributed to the Brexit victory in Britain.
We got our country back!
And Donald Trump's triumph in the United States. What will be the political effect in Canada? Kelly Leach issued a press release proclaiming the Trump victory, an exciting message that needs to be heard in Canada as well.
I think the message from his victory is that there is that gulf that's been developing between the common person and the elites that they had in Washington. And I'm hearing a bit of that also here in Canada.
Many worry that there will be an upsurge of support in Canada for the anti-immigration ideas espoused by Donald Trump.
So the experiment with Mr. Trump is an interesting question, because this beautiful world that I'm describing here in Canada is a fragile one, a very, very fragile one. And it's important that people who have microphones and megaphones talk about this. And I think in Canada we've gotten to the point where we can talk about it.
50 years ago, Canada implemented an immigration system that emphasized the long-term economic development of the country. About 70% of immigrants are selected based on education levels and language skills, 20% based on family reunification, and 10% for humanitarian reasons. For immigration experts around the world, Canada is cited as the most successful model of integration. The majority of residents in Canada's largest city, Toronto, are now foreign-born. And there didn't seem to be a great fuss when that threshold was passed.
The sense that you get walking through Toronto today is of a city that doesn't really belong to anybody in particular. One of the things is that we are blessed here in Canada, and I think Quebecers may disagree with me about this, but I would say that this is true of Quebec as much as it is true of the rest of Canada, with a very thin identity, not linked to religion, not really linked to any strong ethnicity, and therefore one that is very easy for new arrivals to latch onto. You know, Mackenzie King said Canada, a country with too much geography and not enough history. I think the fact of not having the kinds of millennial, 1,000-year-old grievances that we find in a lot of places in Europe is something that has served us well.
One of the oldest immigrant neighborhoods in Calgary is served by the Connaught School. In his first year as mayor, Nenshi was called upon to address the 100th anniversary of the school.
And I looked out at the kids. There were 240 of them. They came from 61 different countries. They spoke 40-some languages at home. And I felt a little bit uneasy because I had talked to some of these kids and some of their parents about their stories. And I had heard horrific things. I heard stories of violence and of degradation and of poverty and of inhuman acts so horrific you can't imagine people doing that to one another, let alone in front of a child. And in an instant, I had a moment of incredible clarity. I realized that regardless of what had happened to these kids and their families, regardless of what wrath some vengeful God had visited upon them, they had one stroke of incredible luck. And that stroke of incredible luck was that they ended up here. That they ended up in Canada, that they ended up in Calgary, that they ended up in Connaught School. That they ended up in a place where the community had a stake in them, and just like me, the community was going to make sure they succeeded to their best potential.
Of course, the shooting at the Quebec City Mosque has shaken Canada's self-image as a tolerant and welcoming society. The incident did give pause to some of the critics of Canada's immigration policy.
C'était pas une bonne idée ce que j'ai dit là-dessus.
Jean-François Lisée, for example, announced that he had gone too far with his story about Muslim women hiding machine guns under their clothing. In Quebec and across the country, the attack brought thousands into the streets, demanding that Canada remain committed to the welcoming of immigrants. Terence McKenna, CBC News, Montreal.